Back when I was in middle school, I used to hang around with a group of neighborhood kids around my own age. There were maybe half a dozen of us, and looking back on it, we fit some pretty standard friend group archetypes. We had our wise and cautious leader, a reckless daredevil, a mama's boy, an all-American sports kid, one boring, quiet kid, and the crazy one. We all got along well enough, even the crazy kid in spite of how annoying he could be. This is back when parents didn't so much involve themselves in what was going on in their kids' minds, and we just got told to go out and play, so I myself didn't realize that there was something wrong with the kid until years later. This kid's family were the most well-off in the neighborhood, which wasn't saying all that much, but they worked their butts off and basically paid no attention to their crazy kid. He told us they figured he was just smart and a free spirit, but with hindsight being what it is, his parents should have gotten him help before it all came to a head, so to speak. So as I was saying, they just figured the kid was smart, so they bought him all kinds of telescopes and science books and encyclopedias, all kinds of things he never used or cared for and would oftentimes trash in a fit of frustration. Then one day, I was exploring in the woods near my house with a couple of friends when, suddenly, we found ourselves on an unpaved road near the crazy kid's house. A contractor had been digging a foundation for a new house, and we often played in the pit and gravel piles. Down in the pit was the crazy kid, doing something we couldn't see until we got closer. Being boys, we needed no excuse to scramble down into a deep pit and explore, so skidding down the sides of the pit, we ran over to him. When we got to him, we noticed that he had what looked a lot like a chemistry set with him, and although I couldn't see exactly what it was he was doing right away, I did notice the huge, wild smile on his face. A big frog from the swamp had somehow fallen into the big pit, and this boy had captured it. Using pins from his biology kit, he had nailed it to the ground on its back through all four legs. The terrified frog was still alive when he cut it open with a scalpel. Then, I guess out of morbid curiosity, he poured a bottle of hydrochloric acid into the frog's open chest cavity. 4 decades later, and I still can't seem to shake what I saw and heard that day. He was laughing out loud as he held the bottle and scalpel, watching with glee as his subjects squirmed in agony. I was so freaked out that I just ran. I caught a bunch of guff for it and got called a chicken later, but that's what I did. I just never seen that kind of stuff before, even if it was just a frog. I ran all the way back home, ran into the open garage, then climbed into the loft and just cried my eyes out. I could not get the sights and sounds out of my mind. I just couldn't for the life of me believe that anyone could be so cruel. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion in some old, scratchy army blankets my dad kept in the loft, and then I awoke to what was the sound of my mother calling me for dinner. I still felt sick. I wasn't hungry, and I remember thinking that I would never be hungry again. I didn't feel like I could tell my parents what had happened. I didn't think they would punish me, but I knew that they would call the boy's parents, and then my life would just be torture from getting called a snitch as well as a chicken. I had to get up and push my food around the plate until my mom excused me from the table. That night, reliving the whole thing in my dark bedroom, I decided that I would never, ever hang out with that boy again. I never spoke of what happened with my other friends, but I know that they were affected. Maybe not as much as me, but they clearly were. They stopped hanging around with the crazy kid too, and he became even more isolated and frustrated, especially with his mother. His mother even came staggering around to our parents' places one night, asking why no one liked her boy. But she knew why no one liked him. It was the talk of the neighborhood for weeks. Years went by, and eventually he dropped out of school and disappeared into some private program for kids who needed special help. And we were glad to hear it, but too little too late, if you ask me. I'm actually 55 years old, and thinking about this experience that occurred to me more than 40 years ago still upsets me when I think about it, and I know that I'll probably have nightmares because I brought it up tonight. It was without a doubt the most disturbing thing I'd ever experienced. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided that we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said that she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times, and I was winning. Our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won. But instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off, or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured that we would just get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so, of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to make sure that you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know that she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought that I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided that we should probably get out in about 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now, too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now, we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she's a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring, dead, straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy by this point, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed to be a bit disoriented. It had been maybe 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought that she would have came back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, A man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be led into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys and unlocked the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there for any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguards started to try to shut the door and push us back in with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they won out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before our grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken up by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what had just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I mean, I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It is pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions here, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? Why would she do that? When I was maybe 12 or a little older, I was waiting for my ride after school one day when this big white family van pulls up in front of me and asks if I'm waiting for my ride. My family had a van just like this one, so it wasn't suspicious or anything to me, but I was dumb and didn't register that, yeah, I am, and he was asking an obvious question because here I am sitting outside the school by myself, but I answered anyways, and then he asked what my name was, and I hesitated, but he explained that he was looking for someone, so I gave it. I told him my name, and it was Thea, and he said, "Oh, so it's you. Your mom asked me to come pick you up from school." He then introduces himself as Sam, my mom's nephew, and I never really met my mom's family, so I was none the wiser. Eager to get home and out of the cold, I didn't question him much, even though I was skeptical. I just jumped in the car, and thinking back on it now, I realized how dumb I was and how lucky I was to get away. I got in and we started driving towards the opposite direction of my house. At first, I thought no big deal of it because there was a route this way to my place, but it was just further. But soon we were passing that route too, and out of nowhere, I realized that we were on the motorway. Now all traces of tiredness had left me, and I was on the edge of tears. I asked him if he could please take me home, and that if my mom sent him, then he should know that I'm not really allowed to go out after school, but he just kept ignoring me. At this point, I was officially bawling my eyes out, and cars that were passing us on the motorway or standing next to us in traffic were just starting to stare. At one point, I was crying so much that he slammed his hands on the steering wheel and started mumbling how this would be easier for both of us if I would just shut up. But now I wasn't thinking straight, and I knew that anything would be better than making it to wherever he was taking me, so the next time the car slowed down, I unlocked the door and jumped out. In all honesty, I wasn't thinking at all, because if I thought about it, I would have chickened out, and for once, thank God, I didn't. I hit the ground and landed on my left leg. The pain was so bad, but I didn't care because in my head, anything was better than being in that car. The dude didn't even bat an eye, I feel like. In the chaos, I'd seen him even try and grab me, but once I was outside, he just sped away. And there was even a driver that almost hit me but stopped just in time, and they got out and ran towards me. The police were called, and my parents as well, but to this day, I'm not allowed to wait outside anywhere, and even before I'm done with whatever I'm doing, my parents will be there waiting outside. I am a member of a website that posts pictures of gravestones for people. One day, a picture was requested of a very old gravestone in a graveyard walking distance from my house, so I agreed to take it. I walked there, found the grave, and stood over the almost 200-year-old grave to see if it was the grave that I was looking for, considering how degraded the stone was. And then, my foot sank into the grave and up to my hip. I nearly passed out. I was sure that something was going to grab my foot. It took me several minutes to get free, and I very nearly lost my shoe, and I was sobbing when I was done. That night I had an extremely vivid dream that I still remember. I was talking to a Civil War soldier on a battlefield. He was telling me about his life and apologizing for scaring me. He told me to call him Charlie. The next day I went to the church to let them know about the collapsed grave. They looked it up on their map to make sure which one it was, and I'm absolutely serious when I say this. He was a soldier who was killed in the Civil War, and his first name was Charles. My grandma often tells this story as though it's sweet because she thinks this dude's intentions were pure. My mom and I are baffled that she can't see the more likely reason, but she was raised very religious and naive, so she never considered someone could do something that bad. Anyway, my grandma grew up in New York City during the Great Depression. When she was around 8 to 10, so sometime in the 1930s, she met a man at the park who said that he would give her tennis lessons for free. Being dirt poor and having no way to pay to do something like that, my grandmother took him up on the offer. They started meeting weekly, and he would buy her things, such as tennis clothes and stuff like that, and they would play tennis and sometimes go out to eat and talk. He told her about how he had a daughter who looked so much like her, but that his wife left him and he wasn't allowed to see his daughter anymore. My grandma was a very cute little girl by all conventional standards, with blonde ringlets and bright blue eyes. Eventually, he asked to meet her parents. They met at a store somewhere to chat, and he just bluntly told them, "I'd love to adopt your daughter and have her as my own. I'll pay you good money, of course." Now, times were desperate. But luckily my great-grandparents were reasonable and decided it was not sell your child to a stranger, desperate. They told my grandma that she couldn't take tennis lessons from that guy anymore. I think about this a lot, and I truly think that I might have stopped a kidnapping just by being in a parked car. My ex-boyfriend lived with me for over a year, and there was a period of time where his truck was acting up, so I would pick him up from work. He worked just down the road from my place at a liquor store, so he'd get out at around 10 p.m. on weekdays. So one night he asked me to pick him up, and I agreed. I get all swaddled in my pajamas and drive down to grumpily wait for him since my bedtime was 10 p.m. due to my job, obviously, and I park my car in the small parking lot out front. His liquor store is sandwiched between an adult store and a head shop, Party Central, I guess, but now the head shop and liquor store are closed, so their thirds of the lot are mostly empty. Now the adult store only had one other car in front of it. Outside the liquor store is my car and one other, so 3 total cars, with a woman standing outside of it sitting on her hood. I don't think much of it. Maybe she's waiting for someone in the adult store or one of the ex-co-workers and just relaxing in the summer night air. I sit hunched in my seat, car off, playing on my phone. I noticed a white van. I know it's cliche, but that's why I noticed it, pull into the lot. It drives through slowly, then back out into the main road. Weird, but maybe they wanted alcohol and saw the store was closed. Whatever. I go back to my phone, but I glance at the woman. Still outside her car, but moved between my car and hers. I had parked a couple of spots over, so close, but not too close. I just go back to my phone. The same white van pulls in again and stops in front of her. I sit up slightly and watch. I'm a true crime nut, and what can I say? I'm just easily alerted. And watch some guy roll down the van window and lean out to talk to the woman. I pull out my phone and snap a photo of the license plate, again, just in case, but I can't see anything with it. So I turn on my car and go to open the door, but the guy in the van instantly pulls away and leaves. The woman moves closer to my car as I get out and approach her, and I ask her what that was, and she says that she doesn't know. He was trying to ask her for directions, but stopped mid-sentence when I turned on my car. I ask her if she's waiting for anyone, and she says kinda. She's been sitting outside the liquor store for 3 hours, waiting on a tow truck because she locked her keys inside her car, and she couldn't leave the car because her puppy was in the back seat. Thankfully, it wasn't hot that night, but it was actually comfortable, so she was just sitting there waiting for the tow truck. As her and I are talking, my ex comes out and asks what's up. So we decide to help her since there was no way that I was leaving her alone now. I have some rope in my car for emergencies, and my ex uses it to basically jimmy her door open, make a lasso, and hook it around the door lock and pull it up to unlock it. It works, and we open the door just as the tow truck pulls in. Her puppy's safe, we wish her well, and I get back in the car just to tell my ex. I think I almost watched her get kidnapped. The year is 2004. I was about 8 or 9. The cool thing to do was to walk uptown to the local Starbucks, an area with lots of shops and foot traffic. A man in his 40s to 50s was parked near the Starbucks down a side street. He had a terrible brown clunker of a car with no license plates. I remember thinking that he was a big fat man and looked quite pathetic and dirty. He called my friend and I over to his car. "Can you girls please help me out? I need to get something from my trunk, but I'm too big to get back in there and get it. Can one of you crawl in there and grab it?" I remember he had an uneasy laugh, and he was trying overly hard to be nice to us. It just seemed fake and labored. I immediately was like, heck no, because my parents taught me better, but my friend was more gullible and was going to help him. We approached the car, and I could see his trunk was totally empty. I grabbed my friend's arm and pulled her back. I told the man we couldn't help him. My friend was a really sweet little girl and reiterated that she wanted to help him, but I refused and kept pulling her arm to lead her away. She said that I was being mean, and a couple of other kids were walking by at the same time, so he turned his attention away from us and started asking them for help. My friend and I ran inside the Starbucks to tell the workers that there was a man outside trying to get kids to crawl in his trunk. They called the police, but the man and his car were gone by the time they arrived. I'm browsing around aimlessly in TJ Maxx. I'm a 35-year-old female and kind of just all over the store, not sure what I'm going to get. Now I see this young guy, probably early 20s, skinny with glasses. I didn't think anything of it. I went to a different spot and I see him again, and he's in the same aisle picking stuff up to look at and putting it back. No card or anything. Now, my red flags were not yet raised. And then I see him a third time in a different area doing the same thing, but now stopping and texting someone. Now my spidey senses start to perk up a little bit. Like, okay, this is weird, but I'm not nervous yet per se, but I am a bit more aware. And then it happens again, and this time I know something is weird. He's following me all over the store and just not buying anything. So I start kind of zigzagging through the store, and I find a coat I want to try on. At this point I was very wary, but also thinking I'm being ridiculous and paranoid, but I just had this strong sense that this was not normal. I went into the dressing room for about 15 minutes hoping that I would lose him. I came out and didn't see him for another 20-ish minutes. I was relieved, thinking that I was definitely being paranoid and he probably just left. I go to the checkout after almost an hour and a half of shopping with a cart full of stuff. I was the only one in line. I get called to cash out and I turn around and this man is immediately behind me in the checkout. He just came out of nowhere. He had one item, some cheap little decoration. At this point, I was full-on panicking. The cashier could tell that I was being weird and very distracted, and at the risk of sounding crazy, I almost didn't say anything, but I told her that I think this man was following me. She was extremely empathetic and did not seem very surprised. She says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll have someone walk you out to your car." And I was so thankful for her kindness. The man checked out with his one item and left the store with some older man who I didn't see with him before, and that older man had absolutely nothing with him. The parking lot at this store is a huge, dark plaza. I did not want to go outside alone. I just knew that it was a very bad idea. The cashier asked another employee to walk me out. She was younger than me, but so sweet, and I apologized profusely because it was sleeting and cold raining out, so she had no coat, and she said, "I don't care if it's downpouring. I'd still walk you to your car." It was so sweet, really. She walked me all the way and even waited until I pulled out and drove away. The whole time I was shaking like a leaf. Like I said, I've heard this happen to so many women, but I kind of thought that they might be being paranoid or exaggerating, and that was extremely scary though. The more I think about it, the creepier it gets. He followed me around the entire store, and everywhere I turned, there he was. I have no idea what his deal was, but this was just so unsettling. My husband freaked out and does not want me to shop alone anymore. I don't really want to shop alone anymore either, and if I had not been paying attention or dismissed my bad feelings, I have a feeling something very bad may have happened. As a woman, being aware of your surroundings is your greatest asset. A few years ago, I was staying in a family resort in Turkey with my parents and sister. I was 17 then. One night after we had finished dinner, I wanted to go upstairs to our hotel room to get my jacket. The guy that entered the elevator with me was already giving me weird vibes, but I shook it off. He got off the same floor as me and also followed me down the path to our room. I eventually started running because I felt so uneasy and he was getting so close. I reached our room and thought that that was it, just some weird encounter that I was overreacting to. I had sufficiently calmed down and was going to leave when our hotel room's phone rang. I picked it up, assuming my parents had made a call from the reception desk, but instead, it was a male voice telling me how sexy I looked and how much he wanted to do terrible things to me. I hung up immediately and started crying. That dude had been close enough to see which room I had entered to be able to make that call. The phone rang a few more times, but I refused to pick up. I must have been in our room for a long time because my parents had gotten worried and had come upstairs to check on me. I explained what happened, and when the phone rang once again, my father picked up. There was a silence on the other end, and the call was quickly ended. I was terrified that I'd see the man again, but weirdly, I didn't. I kept looking out for him at the pool, the restaurant, etc., but I never saw him again. My parents told me to brush it off, that such creeps are everywhere, truly, but it really shook me to my core. I was horrified about what may have happened if I hadn't started running. And to this day I hate walking down long hotel floors on my own. It just fills me with this sense of dread. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. Okay, so this happened not even an hour ago, and I'm still shaking. I'm now safe, thank goodness, but I'm so anxious I can barely type this. I'm a 24-year-old female currently staying with my boyfriend. He's 28, and he was having a small get-together. We were having drinks, so once we were out of most of the juice, I decided to go to the nearby store to pick up a few. Now keep in mind, this store is about a 3-minute walk away, so I had no problem going by myself since I was also the most sober one. I had about one drink and was in the middle of a second one. Everything on the way there went perfectly fine. I went in, got what I needed, and left. As I was walking out, a man who looked to be about in his mid-30s was about to walk in, but stopped. I kept walking. He turned around and said, "Hey." I didn't respond, and kept going on my way. I knew I didn't drop anything, and I had everything I came for, so I didn't need to have any other interactions, especially since it was nearing 3 a.m. He then proceeded to start following me, and when he was close enough, he said, "You're pretty. I need me a you." I again ignored him and kept walking. He then taps me on the shoulder and asked for my number. I said no, and to please leave me alone. He replied with, "But you're so pretty, come on." I ignored it and walked faster at this point. I needed to cross the street too, so I called my boyfriend and gave him the rundown of what's going on, and he asked for a description of the guy, and I gave it to him, and I heard him putting his stuff on in the background. His friends asked where he was going, and he said he needed to handle something. He instructed me to walk faster, and at this point I was run walking basically, and I checked behind me, and the guy was still following me. He made a gesture for me to lower the phone. Now I was just running. Out of nowhere, I just crashed into my boyfriend, and by that point I looked behind me and the guy wasn't there anymore. I'm not sure if he was hiding or something, but he was gone. My boyfriend hugged me and asked me where he was, and I said I don't know, and he told me if I wanted him to go check, and I said no, just to take me back home, so he put his arm around me and walked me back home. I'm now sitting in my room absolutely terrified. He asked me if I'm okay, and I said that I am, and I'm used to this behavior, but I can't help but be terrified. Usually once I've told them to leave me alone, they will, except for a few times, but I can count those encounters with one hand. But this was so scary. The fact that he gestured me to lower the phone was something that makes me want to throw up. His friends asked what happened, and their girlfriends came to check up on me once he told them. I'm now sitting with them still in the room, and they're comforting me. I don't know why this keeps happening. I'm sick of this. I just got back from a business trip in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The area we're in is very high on crime, and I'm pretty shaken up. So my coworker and I, both females, were leaving one of the stores at 8:20 p.m. and it's dark outside, and we're headed to meet more coworkers at dinner. When all of a sudden, a pit bull runs into 4-lane traffic crossing the street from the left of the road to our right. We stop traffic and see the dog is heading right towards a parking lot. We pull into the parking lot, which is an elementary school, and hop out of the vehicle. Immediately, the dog starts running towards us when we're calling it. She comes up to us, and she appears to have shown all the signs of just having a litter of puppies. She has skin and bones, marks on her, and appears to have been abused. The dog is standing by our side, not leaving us. She is extremely sweet. My coworker and I just look at each other with this look of, this would happen to us on a business trip. So we stand there and we start calling friends and family back home to see what we should do. I go ahead and call the police to see if they can send an animal control officer to the scene. They tell us that due to protocol, they can't because the dog is not hurt, harmed, or dead. So disappointed, we just stood there. The dispatcher took our phone number down. While I'm trying to look for an animal hospital that's open 24 hours, my coworker calls a police station. She calls the same one I did, and they took her phone number, and we kept explaining time after time our predicament and how we're staying in a hotel and couldn't take the dog with us, but also couldn't leave her. At this point, it's almost 9:30. My coworker and I are standing there, all options exhausted at this point. In the corner of my eye, I see a man about in his late to mid-20s walk the perimeter of the school. He's watching us intently, and I locked eyes with him. My coworker sees him as well, and she opens the side of her car and grabs her taser when the man walks by. We just thought it was weird, so we thought nothing of it due to our mind just being so caught up in the situation regarding the dog. We suddenly got a phone call from the officers stating that they were in fact going to send out an officer. Excited, we stood there waiting, and 25 minutes go by, and we suddenly get a call from the sheriff's office once again that they were not coming by, and suggested that we either leave the dog or just keep it till the morning. Standing there irritated, suddenly we see the man walk by us again, walking the sidewalk, staring at us. This time the dog seems to try and walk up to the man, and we yell for it to come back to our side. At this point, he walks by for a second time, and once he disappears into the night, we forget about him because our emotions are still running wild. Suddenly, we realize, almost 2.5 hours later, to call one of the others from work who is from the area to see if she knew any fosters or any 24-hour shelters or anything we could take this dog to. My coworker looks over the hood of her car, and she sees a car, which I don't learn until later, and I do see this same car driving down the road, then turn an illegal U-turn into the street. I'm standing at the back bumper of her car near the back door, and she is standing at the front of her car. The car is speeding through the school parking lot going towards where I'm standing. All of a sudden, she yells to get in the back seat and pushes me in the back seat and throws the dog into the back seat as well. The car looked like it had been T-boned, headlights are out, and she struggled to get in the front seat. At this point, the car realizes that I can't corner my backside, so it drives around the bus loop to try and corner my coworker, and she finally gets into the car and speeds out of the school parking lot when this car is on our backside trying to speed up against us. The car chases us and follows us for half a block, and then does a U-turn back up the road where we were. The local that we called, who also works with the company, ended up knowing someone and a dog rescue. Network, and we met the person to give her the dog, and she was accredited and very trusting, so we drove about an hour away to meet this person. We were honestly pretty shaken up badly, and before we met the person who was going to foster the dog, we just kept driving so the car wouldn't follow us. I do want to touch base on the fact that the area was not very nice, and one of the locals that we were on the phone with about the rescue did in fact tell us that dog fighting was really bad in the area. And again, the dog looked to be in bad shape at the time, but it was healthy. But what are your thoughts or ideas on what happened to us? Do you think that guy had something to do with dog fighting? While deployed to Iraq with the Army, one night I'd been assigned evening guard duty in one of the camp's perimeter towers. These towers were just upended concrete pipe, 10 feet in diameter with a roof, floor, and a ladder inside. It was only 2 stories up. In each tower was a set of night vision goggles, a pair of binoculars, machine gun, a radio, and a spotlight. There were 2 of us per tower on each shift. On this night it was me and my buddy, who goes by Smith. It was a quiet, cloudless, moonlit night. Our camp was small and situated on a low hill. 5 towers in total protected the perimeter, with number 3 being the one facing the rear of the camp. We had mostly an unobstructed view out for at least a mile in all directions, but there were small hills and valleys, no more than 6 feet at the most. Otherwise, it was just empty desert. While we scanned our sector, Smith and I just shot the breeze. We complained about the war, talked about going back home, having a beer, and just meeting girls. It was the best way to pass the time. Then at some point during the night, we hear what I can only describe as the shriek. Like nothing I'd ever heard before. The sound came from somewhere off in the dark, maybe 30 to 50 yards away from us. It was short, barely a second and a half long, sharp and loud, and ascending in pitch. Something that could have been either a child, woman, or an animal in distress, or an animal in anger. It really stopped my heart, and it was even more frightening in contrast to the calm and quiet of the evening. And then it happened again, and then again. "Smith, you hear that?" I asked. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" he said, grabbing the binoculars and looking out. "I don't know, but it's freaking me out, man," I said. "Get the light out there," Smith said. I got the spotlight out, scanning the desert, but there was nothing out there. I kept moving back and forth. "Get the night vision." Again, I scanned the desert for as far as I could see, but there was nothing, just empty air. We got on the radio to the watch commander. "HQ, this is Tower 3. Did you hear that? Over." The radio cracked and then responded, "-3. What am I supposed to hear?" By then, the noise had stopped. We described what we were hearing and asked the other towers if they had heard anything. No one but us heard it. Watch commander checked back with us a couple of times, then came up and looked for himself. He tried the night vision, then the binos with the spotlight. Nothing but sand. The shrieking was gone and all was quiet again. We finished the shift with no more interruptions, just the same as before, except for one difference. I stayed perched on the machine gun, watching the night. In the morning, after we were replaced, Smith, myself, and another buddy from the watch commander's office went out to the gate and headed in the direction of the noise. About 30 yards from the gate was the most horrific thing I've ever seen. Scattered in about an 8-foot diameter was a splashing of dark brown blood-soaked desert sand with bits of flesh. None of us could tell if it was human or animal, but whatever it was, almost nothing was left. What scared us most is that from the sight of the blood, we had a direct line of sight straight to Tower 3. Even without the spotlight, we should have been able to see whatever had taken place here. But neither of us in the tower saw whatever did this. Even the watch commander himself came out to investigate. A report was made and a brief search of the area was conducted. No foot or paw prints, no drag marks, no patterns, Nothing. Whatever it was, it shrieked 3 times, left nothing but blood, and disappeared. It was well within eyesight of us, but was never spotted. It just vanished. It's been years now, and I can still hear that desperate noise, and it still gives me chills. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST. And there are some super fun live streams that you can join me on and talk to me every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, the Askasm is the new wave. What?